Yeah, okay. Now it should be. Can you hear me now out there? You didn't really miss anything in Zoom land. Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Hi to the friends on Zoom. I really appreciate everybody who came here. So I was saying that northern Antioquia, Colombia, particularly is a place that is plagued with a lot of violence. In Colombia, it's referred to as la violencia, which is decades and generations of violence. The people that I work with in Colombia are people who have been displaced by a very large hydroelectric dam. And before that, they were displaced. They are victims recurringly of la violencia in Colombia. And so before I begin, I want to do some thank yous. And I'm going to keep track of my time because I like to talk. So hopefully I'll stay under my 40 minutes. I want to thank my advisor, Scott Peters, who's here. Thank you so much for believing in me and my efforts. Shout out. And my professor, Deborah Castillo, who more than my professor is my research partner, friend, co-conspirator. You make learning fun and exciting. And my third committee member who isn't with us, but is amazing if you are looking for somebody to really help you with the rigor of the methodologies of your research, Professor Sofia Villenas in anthropology is amazing. I hope you clap after every one of these. Okay, and then of course, Movimiento Ríos Vivos, the Living Rivers movement, which is my learning partners, I like to say. They're a group of 1,500 campesinos who are self-organized and are awesome. And I'll tell you a bit about them, but they have an amazing website, which is incredible. And especially to my friends who I've made there, who I've learned so much with, Rudy Estela Posada Mazo, who you'll see throughout. She's a recurring figure in my dissertation and in my presentation. Movimiento Ríos Vivos President Milena Flores, who's an amazing powerhouse. They're a women-led movement. And Alexander Osorio, who, among other things, is not related to me and is Milena's husband, and played a really key role and just is a very wonderful person. I would like to thank my father, Jaime Humberto Osorio, who accompanied me on all 6 of my field trips on my visits, and really made it possible for me to do extensive research in el territorio, the territory as it's called, which is really a very, honestly dangerous place. But I do consider myself an insider, outsider of sorts, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And my unofficial 4th committee member and great supporter and friend, Dr. Jane Mount Pleasant, who is here. Yes. And the DGSs through the years of my being here, which has been a while, Rachel Besner-Kerr, John Sippel, and Fuad Maki. The Decolonizing and Reimagining Higher Learning Research Working Group, sponsored by the Polson Institute, which really helped me think through a lot of the theory that I've used for this study. The Latin American and Caribbean Studies program at Cornell and the Cornell Graduate School and other Cornell entities for supporting my scholarship and in the department. And then my undergraduate research assistant, Sarita Vascarella, who's here, and Farsan Hussan Zaida, both are brilliant 4th-year students who are graduating this year. And my great friend, Erin Hoven, who supported my research as well, who came from Pennsylvania. And then the rest of my family, friends, and community, because I spent a lot of time in Ithaca before and during my PhD studies, and it means a lot for me to be standing here in this place, finishing this chapter of my studies and my life. So I've already introduced myself a little bit, but I do think it's important to give you a little bit of my positionality. The people I study are rural people. In English, there's a word that I really don't like that's called peasant. Because it has negative connotations, although it's widely used in research, and there's a journal dedicated to peasant studies. But in Colombia, we use the term campesina and campesino. And campesino, it comes from campo, which is rural areas, the country, as we might say here. So I would say the translation I like to use is rural people. So I myself have Campesina roots. My maternal grandmother and grandfather were both campesinos. They lived in the campo. I will say my grandfather was an owning class campesino, so he owned a lot of land. And in owning that land, he had a lot of standoffs with the guerrilla, which is one of the armed groups at the margin of the law, as the people who I study say. So I do have my own campesina roots. I already told you my father is from this region. This region in Antioquia is a culture which they call paisa, which is the culture of Medellin, but it also spreads to other departments, to other states. And my father is from Caldas, which he's from Marmato, a town there, but they have the same accent. They have the same culture. They eat the same foods. And so he accompanied me on my trips and helped me understand a lot of the expressions and, you know, how to drive around there. It's very mountainous and scary to drive around there. And both of my parents are from the Cauca River. So the Cauca River is a huge character in this story. The Cauca River is the second largest river in Colombia because the Amazon only goes through a little piece of Colombia. So the Magdalena River is the largest river in Colombia. And the Cauca River, where we're talking, is in the northern part, in northwestern Colombia. And I'll show you a map. But the important thing is that the dam that has displaced my partners, my research partners, is located on this massive river and has dammed it. And my family, from my father's side, Marmato is a town that is on the Cauca River, upriver from the dam. And my mother was born in a town called Buga, which is on the same Cauca River. So this river is the place of my roots as well. And the place where my mother is near where the river is born in southern Colombia. Well, south of Cali. Okay. So, wait, this isn't working. It's okay. 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 So I am going to be talking about the topic of epistemic injustice, which is an injustice of the sort that has to do with knowledge and knowledge creation. I realize that I've taken this jacket off. Okay. Thanks. Sorry about that. I also get really nervous and then I start shedding and putting my jacket back on. So I'm sorry about that. Epistemic injustice is an injustice of the particularly epistemic sort, which means having to do with systems and ways of knowing and knowledge, and access to shared knowledge and to shared meaning making. So to being able to make sense of a situation, like, for example, a massive dam that has been built on the river that you and your ancestors have lived on for generations and has now changed the whole way that you live and understand and live in relation, not just to that river, but to the land and to the other beings that were displaced with you. So one of the ways of acting towards epistemic justice is, in my view, through powerful collection and sharing of testimony, of bearing witness, at me as a scholar, to the testimony of the people that I study with. So I'm going to read this to you. This is the testimonio of Rudy Estela Posada Mazo, who I shared with you. She is one of my closest collaborators. And this is from a slide that she and I made together when we traveled to Barcelona and to India on a little presentation tour last year. And she says, I'm going to read it in Spanish and in English. Me llamo Rudy Estela Posada Mazo, tejedora, defensora de los derechos humanos, coordinadora de Amarú, Mujeres en Defensa del Agua y de la Vida. Desplazada 14 veces por los grupos armados, desalojada por Hidroituango 6 veces. Víctima del conflicto armado. Mis 2 hermanos fueron asesinados. Busco a mi esposo, que está desaparecido. Y a mis 2 sobrinos también desaparecidos en la represa. Este es mi testimonio. My name is Rudy Estela Posada Maza, weaver, defender of human rights, coordinator of Amarun, Women in Defense of Water and Life, displaced 14 times by armed groups, forcibly removed from my home 6 times by Hidroituango. Victim of the armed conflict, my 2 brothers were murdered. I am searching for my husband who has disappeared, and for my 2 nephews also disappeared in the dam. This is my testimony. And I share this with you for many reasons. One is the power of a single story. This is an ethnographic study that I did, and so I did live out daily life and, made collaborative and collective shared meaning with these people. And also Rudy Estela's story is very powerful and contains and tells you about a lot of the violence and a lot of the difficulty, the real tangible difficulty that people have lived, but it's also not by any means unique in any of those aspects of having relatives who've been killed, of having been displaced multiple times, of being a victim of this dam, but before that of the armed violence. So some of this is a shared narrative and a shared story, and that's also part of what was interesting in doing this research together, in that people had a lot of commonality in their experiences and stories, although they also are very individual and unique people with their own individual stories. Okay, so Hidroituango, Aaron has come with me a couple of times to the territorio and took this very amazing photo. This is a photo of the dam, looking at it from just downstream. So this is the wall of the dam that holds millions of cubic meters of water in a very, I'm not a geologist, a very geologically unstable area that also has social instability. And so I want you to know that along with this dam, there are these massive tunnels that go into this enormous mountain. And there's a lot of infrastructure, including a huge amount of roads, and required the privatization of all of the land along the river, which is the place where the people who I study with have always lived and worked. And you'll see, if you're curious and look around, you'll see that there are 2 people in this picture. Here's one, and this is a fishing rod of another one. So there were 2 people, and Aaron, who were fishing in this part of just below the dam. And this is a really awesome picture because it's a place that it's private property, but the people who fish there have a relationship with the guards where they let them go and fish. And Aaron was able to take that photo. So this is Patron Mono. So the people who I do my research with, they call themselves, in addition to being campesinas and campesinos, they're also cañoneras and cañoneros. And cañoneros means people of the canyon of this particular area of the Cauca River. If you have read Arturo Escobar, who's a friend of the movement, he writes about the Cauca River, but that's in a different area of the Cauca River where the Valle del Cauca, the valley is. This is in the mountains, and so this picture shows Patron Mono is their name for this is the old before the damming. Patron, who's a brown color. So mono in Colombia means like blonde, but it also means this like light brown. So patron means boss. So the river was their boss because the people did traditional gold panning and fishing. And so the river is to them an entity, a person, an agentive entity. And so to me, that also came into the worked within the framework of epistemic justice, because when we're talking about testimony, we're not just talking about the testimony of the people that live there, but we're talking about the testimony of the river itself, of what the river is saying to us and what the river has witnessed. And so I think that that's really a beautiful aspect of this too. And I've learned a lot about the personhood of the river from the cañoneras and cañoneros I've spoken to. And in this picture of the old way the river was, you'll see a lot of beaches. And these beaches are the areas of social life and the areas where the fishing was carried out, where the bartering, where people would come down from the mountains and trade vegetables for fish, and where the traditional gold panning, which is called barqueo, would occur on these beaches. And so when this has all been dammed, you will now see that the water goes all the way up, like halfway up these mountains. And even though this picture is very beautiful, it's actually like super tragic and just really intense if you really think about how much water this is and how now you can pretty much go in a boat right to the middle of one of these mountains and say, like, exploit it for a bunch of gold and minerals that are contained within these mountains if you were so inclined to do so. All right. So I'm going to speed along a little bit. I'm going to show you a slide next that I'm not going to dwell on, but it's a very intense slide, I think, which is it's a map, and it shows the connection between the number of massacres. So in this area of Colombia, we measure death not just individually, but by massacres, which means that 3 or more people were murdered at a time. And this is the location of the dam. So this is a very awesome radical geographer named Fidel Mingorance who makes these. And I have this in Spanish and English, and he connects the violence in Colombia with development projects. And not just this dam, but this is the location of the dam, the wall of the dam, the reservoir that I showed you that picture of. And this is the river. So it runs from here to downstream. Up is down. So downstream is up. And this is the area generally that Movimiento Ríos Vivos is active in. And that's the area of most impact. And so the complexities and details of the connection between the deaths and the project isn't something, the Hidroituango project isn't something I have the time to go into right now, but just to show you geographically and give you some of that context. Movimiento Ríos Vivos, I already told you a bunch about them. They're 1,500 members, including their families. They're women-led. They were founded by a woman who is now a senator of the Republic of Colombia. Her name is Isabel Cristina Zuleta, and she's from the same party as President Petro. Well, it's like an alliance, Pacto Histórico. And she was a sociology professor at Universidad de Antioquia when she founded the movement, although she's from one of the municipalities affected by the dam. So the movement, I'm saying that because the movement have a lot of academic friends. And so in part, what our study became also was a study of how to do these types of research projects and how to make partnerships, not just me as a student representing Cornell University, but them as a movement, like many strong movements that some of you might be connected to, that are used to having universities come. And so together we were working against what we labeled academic extractivism, which, you know, where people go in, take pictures, do interviews, and then leave. So we were trying to work against that. And one of the things that's most amazing about Movimiento Ríos Vivos that I just could not believe is some of you might know this about me, that I like to do theater, and I've been developing my own story-based theater methodology. And so when I met them over Zoom, I interviewed with Milena, and it was a really hard interview. And she was like, what do you want? And what do you have to offer? And I said, well, I do these theater games, these story-based theater activities. And she was like, oh yes, the people in our movement have a lot of, we have a lot of collective trauma. And I think that could be really healing. I really like that. Also, we've done our own performances. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, yes. And this is very in line with this movement. They're amazing. So then fast forward, I'll show you a video at the end of my presentation They have written some amazing performances, and one of them is called La Siembra de Cuerpos, which is where they buried themselves under, they brought, it's a performance piece, and they brought sacks of dirt, of earth, and they covered themselves and planted themselves on one of the bridges that was later demolished with the dam. It was drowned by the dam, flooded. So I just am amazed at their use of arts, and also the way that they strategically utilize and deploy their knowledges and their own understanding of how important their knowledges are. So this is my conceptual framework, and okay, I'm using the lens of epistemic injustice, which I'm borrowing from Miranda Fricker, who in 2007 wrote a really awesome book called Epistemic Injustice. And in it, she describes epistemic injustice as two forms of injustice. I'm going to use another crazy academic word: testimonial injustice and hermeneutical injustice. And I promise I'll tell you what that means in a minute, although I'm sure you know. And so I use the lens of epistemic injustice to look at, these are some old school terms, my object of study, which is rural people's knowledge-based resistance to large-scale development, and the object of observation, as it's known, which is the movement itself. And so in doing this, I use a set of methodologies that you'll see listed here, including that story-based theater that I was telling you about, a set of US Latina feminist methodologies that include testimonio, which is its own type of methodology, and pláticas, which is a type of dialogue that is of a particular sort, and also participatory action research from the tradition of Orlando Falsborda, who's a very famous Colombian sociologist, and Patricia Maguire, a very famous feminist PAR scholar, and ethnography, of course. So I just want to read this quote to you from Paulo Freire from 1972, which is about like the whole, my approach with my partners to research that is not just studying epistemic injustice, but acting and affecting action towards epistemic justice. So Freire said in 1972, if I perceive reality as the dialectical relationship between objectivity and subjectivity, then I have to use methods for investigation, which involve the people being studied as researchers. They should take part in the investigation themselves and not just serve as the passive objects of study. So that is what I'm going for here. All right. So I've already talked to you a little bit about epistemic injustice, and Miranda Fricker, who's a moral philosopher, says that in order to work towards epistemic justice, it's important to understand what epistemic injustice looks like. And so she talks about testimonial injustice, which can be on an individual or systematic level, which is all about like a listener, a hearer, not believing or not giving weight to what a speaker is saying to them, basically. Very simply, I'm putting this. Hermeneutical injustice is about the access to the tools of understanding and of shared meaning making. So the very important quote on hermeneutical injustice that she writes that I see as very relevant to this case is, a collective hermeneutical gap prevents those affected from making sense of an experience which it is strongly in their interest to render intelligible. So if I haven't made this clear, which I don't think I have, the Hidroituango Dam, which is run by Empresas Públicas de Medellín, who owns it, this dam costs anywhere between 3 to 5 billion US dollars and was supposed to produce 17% of Colombia's energy. This project has displaced hundreds of people and not been at all transparent in what the processes have been of implementing this dam, of building this dam, of systematically dispossessing people and removing them from these lands. And this isn't something, obviously, that I'm just saying to you or that this movement just said to me. There have been many different academic articles, many newspaper articles written about it. The project itself has its own independent research team that has studied the effects of the impact of the dam, which in 2018, I forgot to mention, there was a massive flood. The tunnel that I showed you, one of those giant tunnels collapsed, and it caused the backup of all this water, and the entire thing came out and drowned like hundreds of miles, displaced people who are still living in those areas, but most of the areas right around the river are not there anymore. They're underwater. And after that happened, very, I think conveniently, there wasn't anything done about it. Like, it wasn't unflooded. Once it became flooded, it stayed that way. And so all of these places are underwater. All right, so I have 8 minutes, and I want to show you a 3-minute video. So that means I have 5 minutes. So, yes, so the place where my research is here, where we are collectively acting towards epistemic justice, and I am identifying that. I'm not going to tell you about Aymara trivalent logic, which I was really excited to tell you about, but I'm showing it to you in case you want to talk about it later. And I'm not going to tell you about time as a spiral, which I also was really excited to tell you about, which I could talk to you about in the Q&A. I already kind of told you I went there 6 times. This research takes time, and because I was a community partner in numerous different endeavors, including with Debbie Castillo, I think that gave me, along with some other things, the ability to quickly fast forward a relationship so that we could have this kind of really intense, very close relationship to do research together and to set research questions together. So this is an example of one of the reports in doing this participatory research, where I am participating as well and we're making shared meaning together. I have had to create a lot of different reports and written pieces for them in the language they understand, so they can present it to their leaders and make decisions about how we're going to move forward. And this is kind of how we set the stage for our medicinal plants project. So from those shared research questions that we set together, we came up with 3 different, I would say, epistemic goals of our collaborative inquiry, which the first one is economic, food, and medicine sovereignty. The second is knowledge recovery and resurgence, having to do with medicinal plants, but also other knowledges of the river, and supporting women's leadership, which was what this came in December 2023, which was already about 1.5 years into our work together. These are my 3 chapters and the different methodologies that I use for them. The first chapter is called To Know a River. So in this chapter, I'm attempting to, and thanks to Serena for transcribing some of these interviews. This is an amazing map that they made in 2013. This is one of those things way before I ever knew them. But I got to know this map really intimately because they asked me to digitize it, because it's a 15-meter long map. It's 43 feet long. And it captures their memories visually of the river, of every little piece, each person. This was about over 200 of them who participated in this. And because they each did it on pieces of chart paper, it has orientations all around it. So, some of it's upside down, and it's really beautiful. And in that chapter, I also included a lot of testimonial interviews, testimonios. In the second chapter, this is the theater chapter, which I could go on about forever, but here, for example, is a picture of Rudy Estela doing barequeo, panning for gold with a shovel, actually. And then this is during my first trip that I did with them, with the help of Debbie. We did this fabric workshop where I brought different fabrics for them to explore, the women we did this with, the different aspects of the river. And this brown one that we brought, that was of the particular color they had told me their river was. And this is them doing the beaches, which is what I told you was the places that are now, this beach is no longer there. And then that picture is of Rudy Estela when we went to Barcelona in India, and that's in India, of her teaching fabric theater workshop. So this is also just returning to these same ideas and these same experiences, but collectively and together. And the last chapter is about medicinal plants. So this is what I would consider towards participatory action research, or I would say it's a participatory action research project, as much as you can do that in a dissertation, where from start to finish, this was a project they wanted to do. They have a list of projects, and I was able, with the support of some small but mighty funding sources, to bring this project to them, and we made the best of it. They used bamboo from their collective land. They used a lot of recycled wood to create this greenhouse and a laboratory for extracting medicinal medicines and essential oils from plants. Okay, perfect. I have 3 minutes left. All right, so I don't know if I was able to get what I wanted to get across to you, but sometimes I am better at doing it through a video. So I made a video, and the video has a lot of words, so I'm really sorry. You're gonna have to read, but hopefully the letters are big enough. And this is just my attempt to show you in the theater chapter what it is that I've been identifying as moments of acting towards epistemic justice, collective action towards epistemic justice. Oh. I don't know if this, oh, there we go. I was cast in the performance. That's from an interview with Cecilia.
Los pescadores, la misma cosa. Como hay tanto pescado, vamos a regalarles pescados a los mariqueros para el almuerzo. ¿Listo? Empezamos de nuevo. Empezamos de nuevo, Marina. Los pescadores, doña Marta, usted también. ¿Listos? Ya, empezamos.
This is about the bodies in the river.
Y no van a formar, y no se va a formar una algarabía duro que el uno habló, que el otro, porque entonces no se va a entender mucho. Y la idea es que ellos se queden eso. Sí, eso. Cuando lo saquen, de dónde vendrá, escúquenle los papeles, los bolsillos, qué papeles tienen. Sería matado con un impacto de bala, sería que se ahogó, la ropa que tiene, el árbol donde se va a enterrar, se va a decir que es un referente para cuando la familia lo esté buscando.
Listo, claro. No,
digamos que en el río es la ceiba, enterrémoslo.
Allá en el río tenía mi hogar, lleno de dicha y felicidad.
Quieren callar nuestras voces y nuestra vida quitar, con amenazas de muerte que no nos dejan vivir en paz, por culpa de un proyecto que nos vino a desplazar. El lamento de nuestro río que nos daba comida, paz y tranquilidad. Le pedimos, gobernantes, nuestras vidas cuidar, que nuestras voces son un lamento por encontrar la paz. Vamos con resistencia a nuestras voces levantar. ¡Aguas para la vida!
¡No para la muerte!
¡Aguas para la vida!
¡No para la muerte!
Okay, so that's the video, which I could talk to you about, but I don't have time. But we'll have questions. But I want to leave you with a poster for an art show that Professor Deborah Castillo has helped to organize with Yeno Spina from Orozco Gallery and the Latino Civic Association, Latino Civic Association downtown. There's an exhibit where Rudy Estela has some of her bags that she's made that I brought from Colombia, along with another undergraduate student, Maria, who also has a couple of pieces in the show. So I invite you to go to that. And I think that is all. There are some select references, and thank you. So I kind of fast forwarded through some parts, so please feel free to ask anything. I think am I just supposed to run this myself? That's what I'm gathering. Okay, great. Yeah, well, and some of the people online who I'm really excited about, but I don't even know how to start to see who like their faces. Yes, Maria.
Thank you so much.
Hi. Thank you.
Seeing everything together now, it's very nice. I want to ask you, participatory action research can be very challenging to implement, no? Like, what are your advice to the ones that we're thinking about it, and what we should do, what we shouldn't, good practices, and what do you recommend?
Well, there are a whole host of impediments, problems, potential problems, and there's really good literature about it. And so I recommend reading Patricia McGuire, who I mentioned, and Patricia McGuire conveniently wrote an article. And this is what I love about participatory action research, as you know, Maria, is really old. Like, well, okay, it depends on what we consider really old. It's from the 50s, 60s, 70s. There was a really awesome time in the global South, and Orlando Falsborda in Colombia was working with a researcher, some researchers in India, for example, and they were coming out with this. So they wrote about like lots of things that if you read them now, it's like totally relevant. I know sometimes we get a little focused on like reading what's newest, but Patricia McGuire wrote a really awesome paper about the challenges of doing participatory action research as a dissertation, like as a graduate student. So about that in particular from a feminist lens. So I would recommend that. When you're actually doing it, one of the there were several factors that made a perfect storm for us to be able to do an amazing storm, a storm of awesome research. But part of it was the experiences I brought and being able to have been a community person, but also the fact I 100% think that they are so organized and that they already were like, whoa, what research project do you want to do? We have they had a whole portfolio of things ready to go. And so I think that it definitely makes a difference when you're working with a really organized entity. But also, that being said, I like to clarify, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to do so, that my learning partners in this research are not the entire movement of 1,500 people, right? Like the amount of people I actually got to work with was about 30 to 50, which is still a good amount of people on all sorts of different projects, people who came to the workshops and stuff like that. But they definitely had their own very, very, there was a protocol, a very serious and non-negotiable protocol of they chose who participated in all of these projects, who got to go with La Profe and do these things. So in a way, it made it easier for me because I didn't have to be put in that position of deciding who, and I think there's a lot of issues when working with communities that other people I know work with communities know about gatekeeping and you just have to, I think, and Professor Villenas helped me a lot to keep in perspective who it is I'm actually participating with. It's not this entire movement, but it doesn't make it any less amazing. It's just important to know what it is you're doing and the scope.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that people will say is you have to do it to be participatory action research. you have to do it from the beginning. Like you have to set the research questions, which means you have to have these initial, and when Falsborda and Freri were doing these things, they were having community conversations, and it takes a really long time to do that whole process.
Thank you.
I'll go this way. Yes.
First. Thank you, Carolina. It was amazing presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I was very intrigued by your research question, and your research has very unique methodologically. And what I appreciate the most is how you amazingly translate your research work into very accessible content, and like those who are not working in this field or region also understand the context and your theories and your concepts very well. And also that your research is actually about acting towards justice, not just about the research, like making
Right.
I think I really appreciate that. And I would have a chance to hear more about that, the slide that we passed.
The time spiral. I would love to talk about that. I will in a moment. Let me see what the other questions are, and then we'll go back to the spiral. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Curious about like the mechanisms, like the theoretically you present there, like the theory of the oppressed, things that you mentioned there.
Yes, yes. Sorry, this is being very weird to go. It's not letting me go back easily. And then what was your question?
Laura, thank you so much. I highly admire your commitment and your time, and maybe the 6 times.
Yeah.
That's impressive. And you briefly mentioned the academic extractivism.
Yeah.
The knowledge, but just giving back to the communities.
Yes.
And there are different forms of business, like journalists, activists, the NGOs. But you're a researcher, so
Yeah.
what do you wanna do as a researcher out of it? And in the future, what's your like goal and what's your message to the academy?
Well, thank you for the questions. I'll answer that one and then go back to the spiral. So well, there are lots, but I did have a little quote. I don't need to read you the whole quote, but Rudy Estela basically was saying to me, well, your university might be really great and big, but our university is even bigger and it's better and it's amazing. And, you know, we're all learning things because we're also feeding people. And, you know, people try to impose these seeds on us and this technology on us. She says this, but we cling, we hold on to our customs and our traditions. And I think in a very, there's a more kind of theoretical answer, but in a very practical way, I found that while I was there, especially during my 6-month stay last year, I actually helped them to formulate and communicate their views on academic extractivism, not because I was like some great teacher and teaching them about academic extractivism, but because out of our pláticas and out of our talks, it was like, yeah, and people shouldn't come here and collect data, and then the data belongs to them, and then they take it with them, and you know, who knows, they might send us some pictures. And I saw a journalist actually go there and a photographer, and they said, well, can we have like a copy of the pictures? Profe Caro, me, brought us like these external hard drives. We can put them, the files are too big. Well, we have these external hard, and he said, there's just so many pictures. Like, I wouldn't want to burden you with having to look through so many pictures. And they were like, oh no, please, like burden us with, but to me in that moment, it became a moment of like reflexivity. Obviously, I can really relate. It's not like I'm perfect. I have definitely done the same thing and taken photos and interviews and left. But to me, it just became so clear in that moment, like, geez, this person really doesn't see this as belonging to them. He really sees it as belonging to him. And also, you know, being a bit patronizing with the knowledge and like, you wouldn't even know what to do with this. These files, they're not JPEGs. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think there's lots from the tangible to just thinking it through with them. And my plan, I'm proud to say, is to be a student at their amazing university and keep working with them, because they are trying to start a school. And so I would really like to help them with that. I'm going to keep doing my research with them is the answer. And then, yes. So here, Natalia was asking about this. I tried to put like from epistemic injustice. My friend Sam is listening, so I'd like him to know that I think that this is a normative framework because we are working towards epistemic justice, right? Like it's about what is it that we should be doing. And I put some examples from different schools of thought. And if you know about like decolonial literature, the pluriverse is something that comes from the Zapatista communities, and they have their own schools. And also, if you're an academic, from Arturo Escobar, who writes about the pluriverse and pluriversality and all of that, a world where many worlds can be and many ways of knowing. Epistemologies of the South is like De Souza Santos, and there's a lot of decolonizing scholars who write about that, and thinking, feeling, where we are not separating, like I think, therefore I am, right? Which then is like a dualism, I think. And so that means I am, which isn't the same as thinking, aming, being. Senti pensante, thinking, feeling is all together. And the feminist Latina methodologies are also about bringing that together and like not separating things out like that. And multi-species justice, which is also awesome. And a lot of indigenous scholars that have worked on all of these different literatures, indigenous scholars that I've read from what is called the Americas, so from Latin America and North America. So in the middle here, I just put a couple of examples that I could think of that are very academic, but the ones I'm thinking about were actually like, what are we doing? Acting in theater towards epistemic justice, acting by building this, you know, project towards epistemic justice. But these are also, Jose Medina writes a really amazing book on the epistemology of resistance that talks about epistemic injustice, and like through the lens of epistemic injustice and justice, looking at resistance and social movements. And I've recently been reading Rebecca Tsotsi, who's an indigenous from North America scholar who is a lawyer and in jurisprudence, the philosophy of like law, writes about epistemic injustice in terms of indigenous dispossession in the United States, and like how that plays out, how it's helpful to look at through the lens of epistemic injustice. But, and then Chela Sandoval, who's very well-known, 2000 book Methodology of the Oppressed, talks about these same like ways of acting and doing. But these are academic ways of acting and doing. And then the spiral, oh my God, do we have time? A question on Zoom, yes. Let's see what the question on Zoom is. It's probably not. Oh! Yes! She's our friend from Mexico.
Says many congratulations for your presentation and for Chiapas, Mexico. Interesting how everything developed, knowing a bit of the challenges you had from the beginning of your research.
You're not supposed to mention those, Erika. I was just saying, Erika, you're not supposed to mention the challenges. Yeah. Thank you. Erika went with me on the first trip. Erika is an amazing engineer from Chiapas, Mexico, and I did my master's research with her. And I had to switch because COVID happened, and many of us lost our research projects during COVID, and I was one of them. So I was glad to have moved on. Okay, time is a spiral. So I don't even know now that I made such a big deal out of it. Okay. There's lots of written about time as a spiral, and there's really awesome stuff that we uncovered in our decolonizing and reimagining higher ed. I mentioned Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, who's an Aymara scholar. who taught me about Aymara trivalent logic, also writes about time, the spiral nature of time, or like indigenous people, which I don't really like saying things like indigenous people, indigenous philosophies, because it's obviously not all one philosophy, but it is agreed upon that there are some commonalities. And part of that is perhaps entertaining the idea of a non-linear concept of time, where there's not just past and then future, present to future, and then we're never going back, but rather that we cycle through and come back. And at some point in my research project, I was like, whoa, I don't know what made me, it was because we were reading about all this stuff, but I found that we have these collective pasts. They have these collective pasts because I told you they've been through a lot of stuff together. And we are trying to build collective futures in our research project. And so there are multiple pasts and multiple futures that are coming together. And I'm going to give you an example. With the collaborative river map, what I found is I was digitizing this map last year. They originally made this map in 2013. So I would say the first time we spiral through was when they made the map, which of course was a memory capturing of a place they weren't at that moment. In 2013, that was before the Great Flood of 2018, so those places were still there, but they were on their way out. They needed to capture them. And then I would say the second time was when I went there, the first time I went there, and whenever they have like visit coming, they bring out this map, and it was a paper map that was kind of falling apart, and it's 15 meters long, so they have to stretch it out across their whole corridor, and it gets all dirty. So Rudy Estela telling me about the memory and just collecting so much, interviews and research data that I just started to feel like watching people revisit the past. And then I would say that then I found myself last year, because I was invited, spent 6 months there, and in the middle of being there, it basically became like, oh, profe, you're so good at taking photos with your iPhone. Oh, profe, you have a MacBook. You can, digitize this map for us. We need to print this on live size on a 15-meter long piece of fabric so that one of the women could embroider it for a movie that was being made about them. And so they were like, oh, you can digitize this, right? And I was like, sure. And it took a really long time. It took me like 3 days to line up meter by meter, take photos, line them up perfectly in InDesign, rasterize, and do all of these things to it. And in doing that, like, obviously, I got to know so intimately, like, I can't communicate to you the beauty of like every single one of those drawings. Like, they're like tiny, like this big little fish in the water, and their chants, and I imagined like what they could be thinking when they were writing. And the writing is everything is spelled wrong because most of them didn't go past like 3rd grade, and a lot of them are not literate, but they did their best, and it was just so beautiful. And so that would be like the third time around the spiral. So I don't know, to me, both the trivalent logic and the spiral nature of time just seemed way more similar to their ways of thinking than the like Western, university thinking that I was bringing. And then another example of that is I said, down is up, because that's like a very like a very well-known story, if you're a big reader of my dissertation, is that like I realized, because they kept saying, allá arriba, vamos a ir arriba, we're going to go up or we're going to go down. And I kept thinking north-south. And I was like, why do you keep saying we're going up when we're going south or going down on the map? And I realized, of course, it's because we're going down river, we're going down. And so like these concepts became really important. That's it. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. I think that's it. That's all we have time for, everybody. Oh, it's 3 o'clock. Yay. Gracias. And thanks to all my friends on Zoom who came. Sí. Saludos a Erika.
When you send me